Hello everyone, welcome. In this video, let's try to cover everything you need to know about how to approach the one space enclosure to the corner star point. So in the previous videos, we covered the small knights enclosure and how to approach that. So please make sure you go through all these videos because a lot of what we're going to cover here will be very similar. But of course, there will be some differences, so it's important for you to know the small knights enclosure first, because first, that is the most common enclosure from the start point these days. And second, I'm going to refer to a lot of the patterns that we already saw in those videos. So if you're serious about learning, about grasping all this knowledge, please make sure you go through those videos first and then come to this video. So if you're ready to learn about the one space enclosure, the main difference, I would say, is that, of course, obviously, this is on the fourth line instead of on the third line. And that means white can approach this shape from the left side here a little differently, right? So when we first talked about the small knight's enclosure, we had this shoulder hit, right? Or even this attachment as ways to approach this shape from the right side here. But on the upper left, if you play the one space jump on the fourth line, then there will be different ways for white to approach, and that is A and B. So we'll talk about these briefly. Actually, already covered A in the kick Joseki, if I remember correctly, right? So it's basically the same shape, right? Same pattern here on the left side. There's a one space jump and a kind of an approach move at A. Very, very similar, just without the kick and the approaching stones on the upper side. So that's the left side. What about the corner? So we can also talk about the 3-3 invasion, which can guarantee a living shape on the corner for white in this situation, but is not recommended, as we'll see, right? Because once again, it is about exchanging the corner territory for influence, and that is going to be black's strategy. And many of those other moves still apply, some a little bit different. So that is what we're going to discuss, right? We'll talk about this once again. This attachment, again, not a great move. The 2-4 invasion, not optimal. The 2-5 invasion, much better. And the approach, right, at G, also a legitimate move. Additionally, there's another move at H, right? It's an interesting move that we'll cover maybe toward the end. So I'll try to cover all these. It's going to be probably a long video, so buckle up and hopefully you enjoy this. So let's talk about the left side first. It's really a matter of preference, right? So if you play the small knight's enclosure, you do not have an annoying move like this approach. So how do you handle this? One way to respond is to simply play away, ignore it, right? So what can this do? White is probably aiming to play right here, right? Something like this, but it's just trying to build a base. Nothing significant. It's unlikely to extend all the way to the corner, right? It's still a little too far from the corner. So black doesn't need to worry about the corner after number 1. But it is still an annoying move, right? Some of you might be tempted to play something like this, right? Just close it off. But when you play a stone on the second line in exchange for your opponent's stone on the third line, your opponent here, white, already benefits, right? This is something white likes to see, right? I play on the third line, you play on the second line. White already benefits from this very simple exchange, right? Because this effectively limited black's development on the left side, and that's the whole point of number 1, right? So of course we have this pressing attachment and number 2, and white will play the hane, black extends here, and white's actually happy to, again, just to build a base here, right? So number 1 is not really trying to take the corner. It is more, right, it's approaching from the left side, it's trying to develop on the left side and preventing black from developing on the left side. So that's all it means. But it is an annoying move. I personally hate it. Or white can play something like this, right? Even more annoying if you're really focused on protecting the corner. Right? Once again, black should take Sente. In this situation, of course, white can come in, something like this. Big endgame moves all around. But again, that's not important. It's really about the left side. And white does still get to play what it wants to play here, I guess. So that's just something that black has to live with, right? If you choose the one space enclosure. The more aggressive move is this attachment. Most likely, black will play the Hane, right? If you play here, which is okay, right? This is the equivalent of the shoulder hit against the small knight's enclosure, and you play at d14 after number 1, right? So that's okay, I guess, but under most circumstances, black can do a little better by putting more pressure on white. Right? So white actually, in some situations, can get on the 5th line here at number 3. I think that's what AI suggests, even under some circumstances. Right? It's not. You might even see something like this, right? White beating a wall here all of a sudden. Right? It's an AI variation. Have to give AI some credit because personally I would never play something like number 9, right? Because number 9 is considered a bad move. You're just giving away the corner territory like this. But if you're building a wall, then AI thinks this might work, right? Under some situations when you're trying to build on the upper side. So that might even work, but the most common move is number 3 right here, right? And black will play the Atari, play these 2 Atari moves, and probably connect, right? So white obviously cannot just take number 6 and sacrifice these 2 stones, although in some AI variations this is okay. Hard to understand, right? So you're still giving up these 2 stones, but how is this okay but the other variation not okay? Anyway, so white most likely will have to play a number 9, and this will develop into a fight. So actually not recommended, right? For most amateur players, because how are you going to fight in this situation? Black really only has to worry about one group, and that's this group, and white has 2 groups on the outside. So I think this will be a tough fight for white, unless white has reinforcement here on the lower left or on the upper side, right? So just so you know that this exists, but it's not recommended if white is not in a strong position. And then we should talk about the 3-3 invasion. Just like the small knight's enclosure, it is not recommended, although as basic knowledge for beginners and of course Q players, you should know that white can make a living shape by playing the 3-3 invasion, right? So of course black will block this way, and the move you need to know is right here, right? So this is what guarantees the living shape, right? This diagonal move. It is not this crawl, right? If you crawl here, then black can double Hane, the tiger's mouth here, and once again, this is not going to be enough ice space. And the best white can do, once again, is this ko. So if you do not have any ko threats on the board and allow black to just capture the corner like this, this is super, super strong, super, super thick, right? This is not acceptable for white. So that is why you do not see whites playing this crawl almost ever, right? If you play the small knights enclosure, maybe white can crawl once and trigger the ko, right? Because that's the best you can get by playing the 3-3 invasion. But because here, white can make a living shape. So number 3 is the correct move. And what black can do, of course, is to keep white on the second line, save number 4 here. White can jump, right? If black further reduces white's ice space, then white will just get out, right? But black can keep white in by playing number 10, So if white captures number 10 in exchange for the entire corner, then black probably benefits from this. This is pretty strong. White does get a little panuki, right, on the second line, but I think black will be satisfied in this variation. Of course, white can live this way. This is going to be a straight 4 pattern, just enough to make a living shape. But again, if it's something like this, then this is a huge local advantage for black because the wall is very, very strong. And white only gets 4 points. This is really not worth it, right? So this is something you need to know as basic knowledge because it is the enclosure, it is the 3-3 invasion. But should you ever play it? Maybe not, right? Unless this is the last corner that you need to play, and if you play this, if you deny your opponents the corner territory that they need, you're going to win, right? Unless you play this as white, you win. You're sure of that, do it. But if not, right, you should consider some of these other moves that we'll talk about. And that is right here. Is it here? Not really, right? Once again, just like the small knight's enclosure, black will be very happy to allow white to live on a corner. But of course, it gets a little bit different, right? If white simply extends, then black has to stand down, right? You have to stand down here. You cannot block on this side, right? This will be the equivalent of blocking on the wrong side, right? So the enclosing stone will be largely useless, right? So this is not okay for black because this stone right here is useless. So you have to stand down here, which is threatening to come in and destroy the ice space. So white will be able to make a living shape by playing number 5, but here already black has a pretty good shape on the outside and can take sente in the early game. And of course, if you play something like this, white will most likely want to trigger a fight, but it still owes a move on the inside. So this is not, right, if you push, if you do all that, you still owe a move on the corner, right? You need an extra move at 13 to make a living shape, and black gets a rock solid wall on the outside. And this is not okay for white, right? It's something that we talked about in some of the previous videos with the small knight's enclosure. So that's number 1, this attachment. Again, similarly, not as great if black chooses to block from the inside, right? Not as forceful. This is just not as forceful. Although arguably in this situation, right, this one space jump is a little better, in my opinion, compared to the small knight's move. Any other variations? This also exists, but of course, white runs the danger of being pushed to the second line. Right? But this is actually still not a complete disaster for white. Of course, you're not going to crawl on the second line like this. 7 and 9 are not okay. What you would do in this situation is to cut, right? Of course, this way, these 2 stones are going to be sacrificed, but white does to get to play at number 11, this Atari. You play these 2 moves, right, to get more ice space on the corner. And more importantly, white can actually jump out and get on the 3rd line here, right? Can get on the 3rd line because black cannot, right? Black is a little short. White has 3 liberties. Black only has 2 on the outside. And if black cuts here, you connect here first and capture number 20. So these are not going to work for black. So number 17 will guarantee white's escape. But once again, if you look at the left side, black is rock solid. And most of white's stones are on the second line, right? So this is why white kind of fails, right? That's why number 3 here will guarantee a base, but it does not guarantee an advantage, right? That's number 3 here. What about this? This will be similar, I think. I think in this situation, black has 2 choices. One is to just allow white to live. Once again, you have a very strong wall on the outside. You have nothing to worry about, and white still owes a move on the corner, right? Even if even if something like this. I think white still owes a move. Does white owe a move here? What if black comes in this way? Or at least a few big co-threats, right, on the corner. So one way, right, is to simply take the wall on the outside, and the other is to actually trigger a fight. But again, black cannot take it too far, because if you extend here and extend again, then these two stones will be killed. Right, number 15 is the killer move. Right, it's going to kill the corner, so that's not going to work for black. So black will probably just take number 3 and allow white to develop on the upper side instead. This is also playable for both sides. It's really black's preference after white's number 3, right? Whether to take the wall on the outside or to play this variation and take sente. So that's all the variations you need to know about number 1. Again, not recommended if you're white in this situation. And for black, you have to know how to respond to your own advantage. The next move is the 2-4 invasion. Is there anything that's very different from the small knight's enclosure, right? Because this is all from this side. The differences are not going to be great, right? If you play something like this, then the position of the enclosing stone is not really relevant, right? So I think most likely it's going to stay the same. Just as a review, what is the optimal move for enclosing this stone? It's actually this large knight's move. I really like this move, right? It stays pretty far away from this stone, but actually enclosed, there's just no way white can get out on the 3rd line, or even on the 2nd line. It cannot really come out, right? Or you can keep it on the 2nd line like this. So number 2 is a good move, or something like this, or even this, right? All of these enclosing moves will work. And once again, the 2-4 invasion is not optimal. And some of these variations, if you're not familiar with this, please check out the 2-4 invasion video from the small knight's enclosure. And most of these variations will be very similar, and the idea is very, very similar. Slightly different is the 2-5 invasion, still better than the 2-4 invasion, still a good move for white in this situation, and it is still forcing, right? If black ignores it, then once again, this is a very good way for white to take the corner, and there's no way for black to contain white, right? White can either push and cut, which is rather harsh, or white can get out on the 3rd line, like this. Right? If you play this, also there's this diagonal and cut, so white can trigger some kind of fight, right? With 1 and 3. So once again, this is forcing. And once again, I think black can play these enclosing moves, right? And allow white to live on the corner. Something like this, right? This will work. And it really doesn't matter where this enclosing stone is, right? It's basically the same as this small knight's enclosure. Well, maybe like a slight difference, right? If you talk about something like this in the future, but that's endgame, right? Endgame moves. So these are going to be similar. This is also going to be similar. Something like this. That's number 2 here. The biggest difference is right here, right? This was a big Joseki that we talked about. But here, it actually doesn't work as well for black, because once again, white is going to play this wedge. And black will not be happy to just allow to be pushed to the 3rd line here. And in this situation, I think white's probably cannot really get to play number 7 because black can play at number 8, right? This enclosing stone, this 1 space jump, sets up number 8, right? You don't really have anything here, do you? No. Right, 4 degrees versus 3. So white is not going to win this. What about this? Just try all these variations. Yeah, it doesn't seem like yeah, white is going to be short, right? Just try these out and see what happens. So number 8 will work, and white is short on liberties. So you do not want to be short on liberties. You just play the 3-space extension without this exchange. And this is pretty good for white, right? You get a 3-space extension on the upper side. You started with nothing, right? So that's not something black will want. So again, you'll want to play the cut, the Atari, and try to capture number 3 and 5. Of course, white will happily give up these 2 stones. But this is where the enclosing stone makes a difference, right? This 1-space jump is at a worse spot than C14 here, right? So this stone should really be on the 3rd line here. It's much better. It's a much better enclosing move for these 3 white stones on the corner. Right? So I think that's the idea. And of course, white will play something like this, right? This diagonal move, once again, very good move. Black again, this extension is the right move. And the trouble, of course, is that later down the line, white will get something like this. This is really annoying, right? We'll get to play these exchanges, and just as I mentioned earlier, right, this exchange between a move on the 3rd line and a move on the 2nd line is always going to benefit the move on the 3rd line. And white can actually prevent black from developing on the left side, just like this, right? And you cannot really ignore number 19. If you ignore it, then let's see. I think white will be able to connect out, right? Something like this. Of course, you can still live on a corner, still living shape, but white has cut black off like this, right? And can easily be the base on the left side. So black cannot really afford to take cente, right? Once again, if you give up the corner, that's pretty big, right? You started with the corner, and now this is all black is getting from all these exchanges. That's really not worth it for black. So that's number 19, right? It puts black at a much tougher spot after all these exchanges. Unrelated to white, this doesn't favor black, is the simple move of this Atari, which I kind of neglected to talk about in the video where I talked about this whole variation with the small knights of Enclosure. So if you play here, then again, black will play the extension, and you think you'll get a 3-space extension here or there. The first problem with this shape is that black will get to play this bending move. And white is short on liberties here, so white actually still owe a move here, right? If you play elsewhere, then it might potentially be problematic. Black can, I think, invade here, and this will be a headache. What do you do as white, right? Because if it's something like this, right, white's shape is in trouble. Maybe this, right, but you have to connect on the 2nd line here, right? So that's going to be a problem. And another potential problem down the line is this peep, right? And black might make something happen. But if there's a black stone here already considering, if you play elsewhere, then this might be a weak shape for white. White might come under attack this way, right? So that is why this diagonal move is much better. If you look at this, right, so number 17 is at the same spot, but here, because of number 15, number 18 is actually much harder to get out. Cannot get out, it's just going to get enclosed. So white doesn't need to worry about the peep with number 15. So I think that's the difference. It is something to keep in mind. Once again, the key here is the diagonal move. It is not this Atari, I just explained, and it is not this Nets move, right? This used to be regarded as a good move by humans, but it doesn't work, right? Because black can just push here. This is not really a squeeze. This is a real eye, and white ends up with 4 cutting points and can only take care of 2, right, with number 21. And black is going to trigger this fight, and it's not going to be fun for white. So just a little review here. And that is why, right, back to number 2, that is why number 2 doesn't work, or it doesn't give black an advantage compared to the small knight's enclosure. Right? So that's something to keep in mind. So if you're playing the one space enclosure as black in this situation, and your opponent plays the 2-5 invasion, and you still want a corner, then just play this extension, right? This is how you preserve the corner, right? Once again, if you want to give up the corner and take influence on the outside, then just play this shoulder hit or something like this, right? This is giving white the choice of moving to the upper side, but the corner territory here will be sizable. So most likely, white will take you up on the offer, right? And play something like this. So that's the 2-5 invasion. What else do we have to cover, right? This approach. Once again, this is a legitimate move, right? Legitimate move. No problem with this. And if black plays the kick, this is the same conversation we just had, right? It comes with all the benefits and liabilities of the kick Joseki. And this is playable, right? Even with black's pincer, this is supposedly playable for white in this situation. But of course, if you're a beginner, if you're a Q player, if you're nervous about this situation as white, as you probably should be, you have a reason to be nervous because you do not have a base, and you really have to escape toward the center. Right? So not recommended for beginners and most Q players. But if you're a dumb player, right, if you want to see this approaching stone as an invasion, right, you're invading, you do not necessarily get a base because there's not enough space, but you can escape toward the center, then it is a viable choice. Right? At least according to AI, this is perfectly playable, and it is one of the optimal moves, right? Just like the 2-5 point. The approach and the 2-5 point are the two of the better moves. And of course, after white settles this group, black is going to have all the liabilities that comes with this shape, right? So that's the kick. What about these other moves? These other moves are just too slow, right? They do not put enough pressure on number 1, as we mentioned before. And we can talk about the pincer, right? The pincers are going to be a little bit different. Right, so remember when we have the small knight's enclosure, the optimal move for white is actually to play the attachment underneath and the hane at number 5. And you're faced with this, the optimal move here for black is actually to stand down here and play something like this. And white will escape, black gets the corner, right? So this is viable for both sides. Wondering about this? I think under most circumstances, right, black will get to play this and capture it. So white doesn't benefit from all these exchanges. Or he can play on top. But again, right, white doesn't benefit from capturing this black stone. Right, so that's why it's better for white to just play something on top. And here, actually, it's not beneficial for black to play this extension on top, right? This is something you need to remember because the conclusion is different. When it's the small knight's enclosure, this is good for black. But here in this situation, there's a subtle difference. Why? Because after this move becomes sente, right? Once again, so all these are taken into account by AI, right? So when white plays here, it is forcing, right? Because number 13 is going to escape this way and capture all of black. But without number 17, then this doesn't work, right? White is going to be captured, two liberties versus 3. But because white has this kind of a harassing move on the outside, and any of these exchanges will be beneficial for white, right? Any of these will be good for white. So that is why overall, this is worse for black, right? Because of this one move. Otherwise, there's no difference. Black gets the wall, white gets a base, a living shape here, and black captures this stone. But when this stone is on the third line here, right, black doesn't have that problem. White cannot harass this black shape. So that's the subtle difference, but AI scores it very differently. So something to keep in mind, especially if you're a dumb player in this situation. Another thing to note is that in this situation, right, either this pincer or this pincer, very similar, AI is also suggesting the 3-3 invasion, which is not something that AI suggested, right, before when we talked about the small knights enclosure, right? Once again, what happens here is that black will want to cut off number 1, right? You do not want to give away all this, right? Basically, the shape is, this is already a living shape. White doesn't really need to worry. And number 2 is not doing much, right? This pincering stone is pincering a living group, right? So it's not doing much. That is why, under most circumstances, you will want to cut off number 1, right? So number 2 is doing something, right? It's capturing number 1. But in this situation, right, this is a little bit different, just a little bit different. This cut, right? Compare this with what we talked about before, which is the lower right, right? So the way white cuts is a little bit different, right? As you can see, it's a little bit different. But the upper left is better, right? The upper left is better than the lower right. That's the conclusion. Why? Because, so first of all, number 15 is more forceful than 31, right? Because if white is threatening the Atari at number 16, right? If black doesn't get to play number 16, white is going to play the Atari, and black's shape will be unbearable, right? So number 31 doesn't have that pressure, right? So I think that's the main difference. That is the main difference. And of course, you can talk about Aji, probably a little more Aji here in the upper left for black than the lower right. So these are the variations where you need to kind of compare them side by side and see the difference. So this is, yes, this is slightly better for white, actually. So that is why AI actually recommends this. Right, and of course, number 9 can be ignored. You can't ignore it. There are other things to do on the board, but white will be able to get on the third line very easily, right, and develop on the left side. And another thing to note, right, something I've observed by watching and playing some of the games against Q players or dime players is number 7, right? It is something that does get taught, right? So what does number 7 do? So number 8 and 9, that's black's right? That's, you have to answer number 9, and of course black will come back and connect here. So the point of number 7 is that white can move 1 space further, right, than what we just saw with number 11. The problem is that you'll get enclosed very easily. Yeah, so that's not going to help whites develop on the left side. And this push and cut may not be as forceful as the one we just saw, right? So it's all about how forceful you can push and cut in these situations. It's not about how far you can reach on the second line. So I think that's something to remember. And I do think it's something that people teach all the time. I was definitely taught this, thinking that this is somehow slightly better, right? Because you can move 1 space down. That's not the case. That is not the case. If someone tells you that, that is not true. Or no longer true in the age of AI. So that's number 11, right? Even if black plays elsewhere, it's not that easy, right? You probably have to play here or here to get on the third line. Right? If you play here, then you're still going to get cut off. Right? Corner will be killed this way, or this way, right? At least, yeah. So you need to be a little careful. So number 7, under most circumstances, not a good move. Right? Something to remember if you're playing this, if you're a fan of this move, you have to know, because many people are online. They are a fan of this move because they think they can move one space further down, but no, this is much better for white, right? Because number 15, you preserve a lot of possibilities, especially when the ladder doesn't work, right? You still have this clamping move, right? Number 1 is not completely dead yet, right? So all kinds of possibilities here. And that is the 3-3 invasion after the pincer, right? Something not recommended with the small knight's enclosure, but it is recommended here. So as you can see, the differences are subtle. The ideas are similar, right? White lives on the corner, gets a cut on the outside, has some aji, has a chance to fight on the outside, but the specific patterns differ a little bit. And of course, unlike the small knight's variation, white does not have this attachment, right? There's no way you can wedge here. No, does not exist. What about this? Also a little weird, right? I think black can just, right? I think black will be happy playing this way because of number 2, right? It's putting enough pressure on white. White, of course, can kind of probably seek a base here, something like this. You have at least one real eye. It's playable, right? But I don't think black should be worried about white proceeding this way. So yeah, I think that is the approach. I think we covered most of the things I wanted to cover. Anything else? Maybe there's one more thing, right? And that is number 4. Number 4 right here, right? So it's kind of an AI move. Not that special, right? Because I think human players would have found this move on their own. So in that case, it's not super special, but just something to point out, right? So when white cross here, you need to be careful. You cannot block. Right? If you block here, then unless this ladder works for black, right? If this ladder doesn't work, then number 4 and 8 will be killed this way. And this is not okay. So if the ladder doesn't work, you have to play here, right? So it'll be something like this. And this is also playable for both sides, right? This is also playable for both sides. Yeah. Or it could be, or it could be something like this, right? And black potentially can even, right, keep white on the second line like this, right? So it's another way to kind of build a wall, right? If white chooses to come in the 3-3 point, black can play here, right? And kind of cut off number 1 and build a wall on the outside. So I think that's the only move I would add here. Last but not least, let's talk about this move, right? It is unique to the one space enclosure. Doesn't exist when the stone is down here, because when you play here, number 3 can get out here on the third line, right? Whereas if you have the small knight's enclosure, then quite obviously the same spot doesn't work, right? You can only crawl on the second line, right? So that obviously does not work. So what should black do? You shouldn't be too worried, right? If your opponent is playing these semi-endgame moves, right? It's not the optimal move, far from it actually. But it's not the worst move either, right? I think it's still better than the 3-3 invasion, actually. Right? Because if you live in a corner this way, this is a more comfortable way for white to live, actually. But most likely, black will just preserve the corner and allow white to get on the third line. It's not the end of the world. Black's shape is still very solid. Black gets sente, most likely. And you might be able to attack it. Why not, right? So that's not something to worry about. Or if you are really want the left side or the outside, you can play number 2 here, or something like this, right? So this is where white will take the corner, but I don't think white will be satisfied with this, right? Or maybe when they're reinforcement, you can get the cut, this exchange first and live on the corner like this. Then depending on the ladder, if it doesn't work, then this will be a fight, right? Number 11 will have to be taken care of by black. But not as good, right? You don't have to start here. This is what you want as white in this situation. You probably didn't need to start with number 1, right? So that is why number 1 exists as a move, but it's not recommended. And when you see it, it's kind of a weird move, but you do not need to panic. It's not a harsh move at all, right? You can either take the corner or just allow white to live on the corner, which is, once again, really the main idea here. For a lot of these variations, give up the corner territory, exchange it for influence on the outside. We're back to the theme. If you don't know anything from, or any variation from any of these videos, know this, right? You can always exchange the corner territory for influence on the outside. And you're a beginner or a Q player, and if you know this, and your opponent does not know this, and you make similar exchanges in your games, you are going to benefit every single time, right? That is the good news, because in most of these variations, whoever ends up getting the wall, ends up getting the influence, has the local advantage. And the thing you need to do, actually, is just to know how to use influence, and it gets better with practice. And once you get better, you are going to move to a whole new level, right? So that is the idea behind these variations, and that is really the idea behind a lot of these Joseki videos I'm making. As always, if you have any questions, please let me know, because these are not meant to be exhaustive. I'm sure I've left out some variations that you might be curious about, or maybe even some important variations. They are important. I'm happy to answer them in the comments, or I might make other videos to make up for any omissions. So once again, thank you for following this channel. If you haven't subscribed, please do. If you haven't liked, please click like. Good luck, and thank you for watching.